Hi, this is Rick for EDU Mobile, and we're going to end up Unit 3 by talking about touch events in particular. What I'm going to say about touch events also pertains to motion events, but we're going to cover motion events a little bit later in the course. So, how do we handle touch events? Whenever the user touches the screen on an iPhone or an iPad or so forth, there will be a touch event or multiple touch events fired. Classes that are able to respond to touch events are all eventual subclasses of a class named UI Responder. And these include UI Views and all of its subclasses like controls, and UI View Controller and all of its subclasses as well, and also UI Application. And there are other subclasses that are able to respond to UI or to touch events. These responder objects are often called just that, responder objects, or sometimes they're just called responders when we refer to them. So we refer to a view as well as its view controller as a potential responder to events. There are 4 important methods when we're dealing with touches, and these are all inherited from UI Responder. And they are touches began with event, touches moved with event, touches ended with event, and touches canceled with event. And they all do what they say they do. When touches begin on the screen, we will fire a touches began event. And if we respond to it in our responder, or if we override this method in our responder, then we can trap these touches and do something with them. So the touches object that we get here is an NS set of all the touches. So what does that mean? If we have one finger, that NS set will contain only one UI touch object. But if we have multiple fingers down, it will contain one touch object for each finger on the screen. The event we'll talk about here in the next slide. Now, the one that may be a little bit difficult to understand or confusing is the final one, touches canceled. Touches ended means when the fingers leave, a finger or fingers leave the screen. But touches canceled is when something happens on the device that cancels the touches, such as the phone ringing or another screen coming up or something like that. So here are the parameters. The touches parameter, as I already said, is a set of UI touch objects. Every object in this set corresponds to one finger on the screen. The event object has the type and the subtype of the event, the timestamp at which the event occurred, and more information about every touch and where it occurred. Responders also track motion and remote control events as well. We'll discuss those event types later. For now, when we're dealing with touch, the type and subtype will refer to touch type events. So how are these touches tracked? Well, the responder objects are all hooked up in a chain, and they forward these events. The first thing that happens is UI application becomes aware that some event occurred, a touch event in this case. It passes those events along to UI window, and that, or the actual main screen of the application. And that passes the events to the actual view where the touch occurred. So if that view where the touch occurred handles the event, it's all good. If it doesn't handle the event, it starts getting passed back up the chain until some responder object has a touch handler method that responds to that touch. And if no responder handles the event, it comes all the way back up the chain to UI application, and eventually it's going to be discarded. So this kind of chain is called the responder chain. Every object in your app that is a subclass or eventual subclass of UI responder is able to respond to any touch event. The UI event object's touches for view method we can get returns the set of all the UI touch objects for any particular view. So we pass it a view, and it returns a set of touch objects or a subset of all the touches for the event that correspond to touches that occurred within the bounds of a particular view in our application. So we can inspect these touches and the events and see where they actually occurred. And this is very useful. We'll see a use for this in the demo. So now UI controls are kind of special cases. They are view subclasses, and therefore they are UI responder subclasses. And they can respond, and they do respond to touch events in various ways. Active controls like buttons or sliders or something like that, they implement their own touch event handling. And they have a touches began, touches moved, touches ended, and so forth, but they become the actual effective responder for these touch events. Now, if we have them embedded in a view controller, we can also override them, see where they occurred, and perhaps change some things. But where this really comes into focus, so to speak, is with passive controls. Passive controls are UI controls, and they are subclasses of UI view, and hence subclasses of UI responder. They receive touch events. They may just throw them away, but they can respond to them by overriding the touch handling methods if we need to. In other words, we can subclass a UI control to override, we could subclass, let's say, UI label, to override these touch handling events and do things with those touches if we needed to have a responsive UI label, so to speak. But there's an easier way to do this. An easier way to do this is to implement the touches began, touches moved, touches ended methods in the view controller, and then look at the event object that comes out of those methods to see where the touch occurred. And if it occurred on a label or a particular label that we're interested in, then we can do something within that method. And again, we'll see this use in the demo. So finally, several types of touches have been called gestures by Apple, and we have shakes, or bad example, I'm sorry, that's a motion event. But we have taps, and we have swipes, and pans, and rotations, and things like that, pinch gestures and things. These have been wrapped up and given predefined recognizers. And these gesture recognizers are available when we design our user interface in Interface Builder. What we do is we simply drag one of these gesture recognizers into the view in Interface Builder, and then we write an IBAction method in the view controller to respond to that gesture. And then finally we wire the gesture up with its IBAction method, and then our app will respond to these so-called pre-canned gestures. Thank you very much.